You can have her. But there's a catch. Travis Bishop stood with his arms crossed, the scent of oil and metal thick in the air behind Bishop's garage. A stained jumpsuit hung off his bulky frame the same way it had for the last 30 years. Darren Cole, standing across from him in a crisp button-down and dress shoes that didn't belong anywhere near gravel, smirked like he'd already won. Travis didn't give him the satisfaction. You think this is funny? His voice was steady, calm, just like when he worked on an engine. Methodical. Precise. Darren shrugged. I don't see a problem here. Colleen's not happy. She wants out. I'm just giving her what she needs. Travis exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Yeah? That right? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Then you won't mind taking responsibility for what she's about to lose. He tossed it at Darren's chest. Darren barely caught it, fumbling to unfold the paper. His face changed as his eyes scanned the words. What the heck is this? Darren's smirk disappeared. Divorce papers. Pre-signed. Assets locked. Joint accounts frozen. She walks away with whatever's in her purse. Travis watched the blood drain from Darren's face. Still wanna play hero? Darren hesitated, looking back toward the road like he was expecting Colleen to show up and fix everything. Travis didn't give him the chance. You wanted her? You got her. But she ain't leaving with a darn thing I built. And neither are you. The real estate agent clenched his jaw. She's not some piece of property you own, Travis? Travis let out a dry chuckle. No, but my money sure as heck is. He stepped closer, towering over Darren. You got a problem with that, go ahead and lawyer up. Just know I've been planning this longer than you've been sneaking around. He nodded toward the road. Now get the heck off my property. Darren stood there for a second like he had something left to say, but Travis had already turned his back, heading toward the garage. The sound of tires kicking up gravel was all he needed to hear. Inside, Billy Reynolds stood by the tool bench, pretending to tinker with a carburetor. The kid wasn't fooling anyone. That who I think it was? Billy asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Travis grabbed a wrench and started adjusting a bolt on the nearest engine. Yep. Billy hesitated, then spoke again. You all right? Travis didn't look up. Fine. Billy didn't push it, but Travis could feel the kid watching him, waiting for some kind of crack. It wasn't coming. Travis had spent a lifetime learning how to tighten up what was loose, and this was no different. A few minutes later, he stepped out back for a smoke, eyes fixed on the horizon. He'd handled the first step. Now it was time to dismantle the rest of it piece by piece. Travis flicked his cigarette into the gravel, watching the ember fizzle out. The night air was cooling, but his blood still ran hot. He knew he should head home, but the house felt empty even when Colleen was there. He wasn't in the mood for silence, so he grabbed his keys and drove into town. Marty's diner had been around longer than Travis had been alive. A bell jingled as he pushed the door open, the smell of coffee and fried food settling over him. Marty Carson stood behind the counter, scrubbing a coffee mug with a rag that had seen better days. The guy was always talking, always had a story, and most importantly, always knew everybody's business. Travis, what brings you in this late? Marty grinned, setting the mug down. Travis slid onto a stool. Just needed some coffee. Marty poured him a cup without asking. That right? 'Cause word around town is you had a little run-in with Darren Cole earlier. Travis lifted his mug, took a slow sip. That's so. Marty leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. Look, I don't like that guy. Comes in here acting like he owns the place. Always yapping about his big real estate deals, but if you ask me, he's in over his head. Heard from Eddie over at the bank that Darren's been behind on payments. Couple of his properties ain't selling like he thought they would. Travis set his cup down, considering that. He'd already cut Colleen off financially, but if Darren was struggling, that meant Colleen had backed the wrong horse. It wasn't enough, though. Travis wanted the guy to feel it, to watch everything crumble around him. Marty kept talking. And get this, he had the nerve to ask about buying the old Harper place last week. Didn't have the cash, wanted to do some kind of loan shuffle. Bank wasn't having it. Travis smirked. So he's drowning. Like a darn anchor in deep water. Marty laughed. Man like that, all ego and no foundation, he won't last long. Travis let the information settle. He'd spent decades building his garage, his reputation. Everything Darren Cole had was borrowed, held together with slick words and handshake deals. That wasn't real strength. That wasn't worth a darn. He finished his coffee, tossed a few bills on the counter. Appreciate the talk, Marty. Marty gave him a knowing look. Travis, whatever you're thinking, just make sure it don't come back on you. Travis met his gaze, steady as ever. Don't worry about me. The drive home was quiet. The house was dark when he pulled in. the porch light off. Colleen's car was in the driveway, but he didn't care if she was awake or not. He walked inside, straight to the desk in the corner of the living room, pulled open a drawer, took out the paperwork he'd been waiting to use. Mortgage documents, business licenses, the fine print of every financial tie Colleen had to him. He picked up a pen, started making calls. The first was to his lawyer. The second was to the bank. The third, just for good measure, was to Eddie at the hardware store, who had never liked Darren Cole and would be more than happy to spread the word that Travis was taking care of unfinished business. By the time he was done, the wheels were already in motion. Colleen would wake up to a whole new reality. Darren would feel it soon enough. Travis sat back in his chair, rubbing his thumb against a grease stain on his palm. Engines didn't break down all at once. Started with one bad part, a little wear and tear that got ignored. Then, before you knew it, the whole darn thing came apart. And Travis? He was just making sure it happened faster. Travis woke early, same as always. Coffee, a shower, then out the door before the sun had a chance to stretch over the horizon. He didn't bother waking Colleen. By now, she'd probably figured out something was wrong. He could almost hear her scrambling, checking accounts, realizing everything she relied on was locked up tighter than a rusted bolt. He didn't need to see her face to know she'd be panicking. The garage was already humming when he pulled in. Billy was under the hood of an old Chevy, muttering to himself while grease stained his forearm. Travis grabbed a wrench off the workbench and walked over. "You flood the carb again?" Billy glanced up, shaking his head. "Nah. Just trying to figure out why she's sputtering on startup." Travis leaned in, eyes scanning the engine. "Check the vacuum lines. If one's got a crack, it'll throw the whole darn thing off." Billy wiped his hands on his coveralls and nodded. "Got it. Hey, you good? You seem, I dunno, focused." Travis chuckled, shaking his head. "Kid, that's just me doing what I do. Go fix that line." He stepped back into his office, closing the door behind him. The desk was cluttered. Paperwork, invoices, a few receipts he hadn't filed yet. He reached for the phone and dialed. "James, it's Travis." His lawyer grunted on the other end. "I figured I'd be hearing from you today." Travis didn't waste time. "Everything filed?" "Yep. You're officially cutting her off from everything. House, business, joint savings. You're clear. She won't get a dime unless a judge tells me otherwise, and I don't see that happening." Travis exhaled through his nose. "Good. And the mortgage?" "Bank's got the paperwork. She's off the deed as of this morning." Travis let the words settle. Colleen had spent years in that house, but it had never really been hers. She didn't lay the foundation. She didn't fix the pipes when they froze in winter. She didn't spend long nights at the garage to keep the bills paid. And now she'd have to figure out where to go. That wasn't his problem. James cleared his throat. "You sure you want to do it this way? Not leaving her with much." Travis rubbed his thumb against the grain of his desk. "She made her choices. I'm just making sure she lives with them." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Fair enough. I'll keep you posted if she tries anything." Travis hung up, staring out the window at the lot. The sun had finally crept up, lighting the row of cars waiting for his attention. Work never stopped, and that was just fine by him. The bell over the garage door jingled. Travis turned to see Marty standing there, an apron still tied around his waist. "Figured I'd find you here," Marty said, stepping inside. "Coffee's fresh if you want it." Travis gestured to his half-full cup. "I'm good. What's up?" Marty rocked back on his heels. "Heard Darren's been having a rough morning. Seems the bank called about some missed payments. Word is, he wasn't expecting that." Travis smirked. "That right?" "Yep. And Colleen? She came into the diner looking like someone ran over her darn dog. Asked if I'd seen you. Told her I hadn't." Travis took a slow sip of coffee. "Appreciate that." Marty watched him for a second. "So what's next? You gonna let him flounder? Or you got more up your sleeve?" Travis set his cup down. "I don't kick a man while he's down. But I sure as heck don't throw him a rope either." Marty whistled low. "Well, If you need anything, you know where to find me. Travis nodded as Marty walked out. The door shut behind him, leaving Travis alone with his thoughts. He had no plans to rub salt in the wound. Darren and Colleen were doing a fine job of that themselves. But he wasn't done yet. There were still a few loose ends to tie up, and Travis Bishop didn't believe in leaving a job half-finished. Travis spent the rest of the morning under the hood of a '72 Mustang, hands deep in grease, mind working through the last few pieces of the puzzle. He'd done the hard part, cutting Colleen off, putting Darren in a financial chokehold. But he wasn't the type to leave a job half-done. If something was worth fixing, you fixed it right the first time. If it wasn't, you stripped it for parts and left the junk where it belonged. Billy walked in, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of his arm. You hear about Darren? Travis didn't look up, just tightened a bolt. What about him? He tried to show a house this morning. Buyers backed out last minute. Guess word's getting around about his money problems. Bank's breathing down his neck too. Saw him outside the branch earlier, looked like he was ready to blow a gasket. Travis grabbed a rag, wiped his hands, and finally met Billy's gaze. People don't trust a man who can't pay his debts. Small town like this, once that stinks on you, it don't wash off easy. Billy smirked. Guess not. He hesitated. Colleen came by the house yet? Travis shook his head. She will. He set the wrench down, stretching his shoulders. Won't change anything, but she'll come. Billy watched him for a second, then nodded and walked back to his station. Travis turned back to the engine, tightening the last bolt before stepping back. It was running smooth now. Reliable. Unlike some things. That night, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove out to the edge of town, past the strip malls and subdivisions, to a small bar called Rusty's. It was the kind of place where a man could sit with a drink and not get bothered. Travis nursed a whiskey, listening to the low murmur of conversation around him until a familiar voice cut through the noise. Didn't think I'd find you here? Travis turned. Colleen stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking like she had a lot to say and no idea how to start. He took a slow sip of his drink and waited. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Travis, we need to talk. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Go ahead. She hesitated before sitting down. I checked our accounts this morning. Figured you would. Her jaw tightened. You froze everything? Travis met her eyes steady. No. I took what was mine. Left you with what was yours. She scoffed. That's not fair. Travis leaned back, resting his arm on the back of the chair. Fair? You think fair was sneaking around with that son of a bitch behind my back? He let the question hang in the air, watching as she shifted in her seat. Her voice softened. Travis, I never wanted to hurt you. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You didn't think about me at all. That's the difference. She looked away, staring at the scratched tabletop. I thought I wanted something else, something different. But I never meant for it to go this way. Travis studied her for a long moment. It did though. And now you gotta live with it. She swallowed hard, then glanced back at him. I don't have anywhere to go. He shrugged. Not my problem. She let out a shaky breath. My parents won't even talk to me. Travis wasn't surprised. Her father had always been a hard-ass about loyalty, about doing right by your word. Colleen had burned every bridge she had. That was on her. You should have thought about that before you started looking for something better. Her eyes flashed with something between anger and regret. So that's it? You're just done? Just like that? Travis nodded. Just like that. She searched his face like she was waiting for some sign of weakness, some crack in the foundation. She wouldn't find one. Travis had already done his grieving, and he wasn't about to waste another second on a woman who'd thrown him away like a spare part. Colleen sat there a moment longer, then stood up. I guess I should have expected this. Travis didn't say anything. She lingered like she had more to add, but in the end, she just turned and walked out the door. He watched her go, then finished his drink and signaled for another. Rusty, the bartender, slid the glass over. That the wife? Was. Rusty nodded, wiping down the counter. Looks like she took it hard. Travis swirled the whiskey in his glass. Not as hard as she's gonna. Rusty let out a low whistle. Darn, Travis. Cold. Travis lifted his drink. No. Just done. He took a slow sip, savoring the burn. One more loose end tied up. All that was left now was watching it all come down. Travis was up before the sun, same as always. He didn't need an alarm. His body just knew when it was time to move. The garage was quiet when he pulled in, the lot still empty except for a couple of cars that had been dropped off overnight. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the old pot in the office, took a sip, and let the bitterness settle. Billy showed up about 20 minutes later, tossing his backpack onto the workbench. "Morning, Travis." Travis grunted in response, flipping through invoices. He wasn't much for small talk in the mornings. Billy didn't take it personal. "Colleen was at the diner again," Billy said after a beat. Travis didn't look up. "That right?" Billy nodded, wiping grease off his hands before reaching for a wrench. "Marty said she looked like heck. Kept asking if anybody had seen you." When nobody gave her an answer, she just sat there nursing a coffee like she was waiting for something. Travis took another sip, unfazed. "She'll figure it out eventually." Billy hesitated. "You think she'll go back to Darren?" Travis snorted. "If she's got any sense, she won't. Man's got nothing left." Billy turned back to the truck he was working on, tightening a bolt with a little more force than necessary. "I don't get it. If she wanted out so bad, why's she acting like she didn't see this coming?" Travis set his mug down, leaning against the counter. "Because people like her think they'll always have a safety net. They don't think past the next move. She figured she'd have me or Darren or her parents to fall back on. Turns out, she miscalculated." Billy nodded, rolling under the truck to check the suspension. Travis let the conversation die there. It wasn't worth any more of his energy. A few hours later, a familiar car rolled into the lot. Travis barely needed to look up to know who it was. "Darren." Travis walked out of the bay, wiping his hands on a rag as Darren stepped out of his BMW. Looking more like a man walking into a fight he already knew he'd lost. His suit was wrinkled, the shine from his shoes dulled by the gravel lot. Travis didn't say anything, just waited. Darren cleared his throat, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Look, I know you don't want to see me, but I figured I should." "Should what?" Travis interrupted. "Apologize? Explain." Darren shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just trying to make things right." Travis let out a short laugh. "You ain't got the means to do that." Darren's jaw tightened. "Look, man, Colleen, she's a mess. She's got nowhere to go. She keeps calling me, but I can't help her. I barely got my own problems figured out." Travis crossed his arms. "Sounds like a you problem." Darren exhaled sharply. "Darn, man. You really don't care, do you?" Travis stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You want to know the difference between me and you, Darren? I don't start what I can't finish. I don't make promises I can't keep. And I sure as heck don't expect a bailout when I screw up." He tossed the rag onto the workbench behind him. "You took something that wasn't yours, and now you're figuring out you can't afford it. That's on you." Darren swallowed, his confidence unraveling by the second. I didn't think it'd go this way." Travis shook his head. "No, you didn't think at all." Darren stood there a moment longer, like he was waiting for something. Some sign of weakness, maybe a sliver of sympathy. Travis didn't give him either. After a few seconds, Darren nodded to himself, turned, and walked back to his car. Travis watched him go, then headed back inside. Billy was leaning against the workbench, arms crossed. That was satisfying. Travis didn't respond, just grabbed his coffee and took another sip. Billy smirked. "You think he learned anything?" Travis shrugged. "Don't really care." Billy chuckled, shaking his head as he went back to work. Travis let the silence settle, then walked over to the old radio in the corner. He turned the dial, the familiar hum of country music filling the garage. The day wasn't over yet, and there was still work to be done. Travis barely noticed the hours slipping by as he worked. The Mustang was running smooth now, purring like it was fresh off the line. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, tossing the wrench onto the tool cart. Billy was finishing up a brake job on an old F-150, humming along with the country song crackling from the old radio in the corner. The bell over the garage door jingled. Travis didn't bother looking up. He knew who it was before she even said a word. Colleen's voice was quieter than usual. "Travis." He let out a slow breath, grabbing a rag and wiping his hands before finally turning to face her. She looked rough, hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes. The confidence she used to carry was gone. "Good." She stepped closer, glancing at Billy, then back to Travis. "Can we talk?" Travis nodded toward the office. "In there." She hesitated but followed him inside. Travis shut the door, leaning against the desk. She stood there, arms crossed over her stomach, shifting on her feet like she didn't know where to start. "I screwed up," she finally said. Travis arched a brow. "You just figuring that out now?" She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't think it'd end up like this." He shook his head, crossing his arms. "That's the problem, Colleen. You didn't think at all." She winced but didn't argue. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know where to go. Darren, he's got nothing left. He won't even answer my calls." Travis wasn't surprised. Darren had been all flash, no foundation. He was sinking, and men like him didn't stick around when there wasn't anything left to gain. She looked at him, almost pleading. "I don't have anywhere else." Travis studied her for a moment, then reached into the desk drawer. He pulled out an envelope and tossed it onto the table between them. She stared at it, then slowly picked it up. "What's this?" she asked cautiously. "Enough for a motel and a bus ticket," Travis said. "You can take it and figure your life out somewhere else." She blinked, holding the envelope like it might disappear. "That's it? After all these years?" Travis's expression didn't change. "That's more than you left me with." Colleen swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt you, Travis." He let out a breath, shaking his head. "Intentions don't mean much when the damage is done." She didn't have a response for that. After a long moment, she nodded, tucking the envelope into her purse. "I guess this is goodbye." Travis didn't say anything. She lingered for a second like she was waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't. She turned and walked out, the bell jingling behind her. Travis stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway, then exhaled slowly. Billy popped his head in. "That looked intense." Travis smirked. "Not really." Billy glanced toward the lot. "She leaving town?" Travis nodded. "One way or another." Billy leaned against the doorframe. "Guess that's that, huh?" Travis grabbed his coffee, taking a slow sip. "Yeah," he said, nodding to himself. "That's that." He stepped out of the office, back into the hum of the garage, back to work. The garage was quiet when Travis pulled in the next morning. The sun was just creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in muted oranges and blues. The world kept moving, same as it always had. Travis climbed out of his truck, took a long breath of the cool morning air, and headed inside. Billy was already there, finishing up a tune-up on a '69 Camaro. Kid was getting good, learning fast. Travis grabbed a coffee from the pot in the corner, watching for a second before speaking. "Looks like you actually know what you're doing." Billy grinned. "Yeah, well, got a decent teacher." Travis snorted. "Decent, huh? I'll take it." Billy tightened the last bolt and wiped his hands on a rag. "So, she gone?" Travis took a slow sip of coffee. "Yeah." Billy nodded, not asking for more. He didn't need to. They both knew what that meant. Colleen had taken the envelope, taken the hint. No goodbyes, no drawn-out speeches. Just a clean break, the way it needed to be. Travis leaned against the tool bench, watching as the garage lights flickered fully to life. "Darren?" Billy smirked. "Packed up his office last night. Bank foreclosed on 2 of his properties. Rumor is, he's skipping town before they come for the rest." Travis shook his head, setting his mug down. "Man spent his life chasing easy money. Easy money don't last." Billy tossed the rag onto the bench. "So what now?" Travis looked around the shop, taking in the familiar scent of oil and steel, the faint hum of an engine waiting for attention. This was his world. This was what lasted. "Same thing as always," he said. "We get to work." The day moved steady just like it always did. By noon, the garage was buzzing, customers coming in and out, the sound of wrenches clanking against metal filling the air. Business was good. People trusted Travis. They always had. Late in the afternoon, Marty stopped by, a newspaper folded under his arm. He leaned against the doorframe, shaking his head with a grin. "You see the paper yet?" Travis wiped his hands and took it from him. Right there on the second page, a small headline read, "Local realtor faces bankruptcy after financial collapse." Darren's name was right underneath, spelled out in black and white for the whole town to see. Travis folded the paper, tossed it on the workbench. "Figured it was comin' up." Marty chuckled. "You didn't just figure. You made sure." Travis shrugged, grabbing a wrench. "Man's gotta take care of his own." Marty clapped him on the shoulder. "Darn right." Travis watched as he walked off, then turned back to the car in front of him. The Mustang from earlier, the one that needed a careful hand. He grabbed the ratchet and got to work, the metal clicking in his grip. Some things, when they're broken, you can fix. Others you scrap and move on. Travis knew the difference. And this was a darn good rebuild.